Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to your Flip Classroom and our continuing discussion of that lead up to World War I. Right now, the big thing about it is we just finished up talking about imperialism in class today when we talked about the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857 and then also when we talked about the Boxer Rebellion of 1899, right? So getting into it, though, you need to know, just in the back of your mind, that imperialism is still going on in the background, right? And it's going to be a major contributing factor to this massive war that we're about to talk about, which I personally believe is a very undersold topic to discuss in European history, and that a lot of people that actually think that they're like, oh, I really know a lot about World War II, and I find it really interesting. World War I is just as interesting. It's just kind of like further away. It's like over 100 years ago now at this point. We don't have any veterans to speak to about it anymore, but it is catastrophically animalistic in its nature and absolutely disgusting, and also got started off for some of the dumbest reasons you've ever heard of in your entire life. But let's start talking about some of those stupid reasons, shall we? Now, the big thing about it, though, just so you know, quick note, do not write this down. Don't write this down. This is just a little thing for me. All right, so to let you know, as a reminder, there's been a lot of stuff going on with art and literature and science and stuff like that in the late 1800s going into the 1900s. But it's easier to talk about that after the war, right? It's easier to talk about how, like, art looked like this before the war, and it was all pretty. And then it came out after the war and looked like this, and it was all crusty and scary. And it kind of just demonstrates how, like, the psyche of Europe was broken because of World War I. So just keep that in the back of your mind, right? But we're now moving into this huge war, talking about its overall causes, its massive effects, and its huge lingering things over Europe that will continue on for centuries, right? Now, really quickly, okay, when you're talking about the overall causes of World War I, well, what are they, Mr. Terry? Is there a simple categorization that you could cook this down into? Well, yes, that actually is a good question, and I could. Everybody else on the planet usually learns World War I like this, all right? So, like, when I say everybody else, I mean honors kids, academic kids, elementary school kids, college kids, these kids, those kids, not my kids, got no kids, maybe other people's kids. All these other people learn it as the main causes of World War I, right? The main causes. M standing for militarism, militarism, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. A standing for alliances, which is very important. I standing for imperialism, and N standing for nationalism. See how that works out? The main causes of World War I: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. See how that works out just like perfectly? It's like bread and butter kind of stuff. Now, the thing about it is some teachers and instructors would argue that this simply does not do enough justice to the political things going on at the time leading into World War I. Blah, 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 I am a PhD. Now, look, you're not wrong, Dr. Terry, you're not wrong. But the thing about it is, like, is it necessarily wrong to learn it this way, right? Is it necessarily wrong to be introduced to the topic of World War I using these 4 simple categorization causes so it can help you out on an LEQ or a DBQ or something like that, right? I don't think so. I think it works really well, actually, right? So they are the main causes of World War I. Now, the other thing about it is that there are some things going wrong outside that will lead up to a war that looks like this, that was absolutely disgusting, that was fought in trenches and pits modern military technology against the average man. Well, speaking of the average man, the road to war is paved with changes in life, okay? So something that you need to understand is that literally leading up to this war, life had changed so much for the average European person going into the 1900s, right? Going into the early 1900s, things about the common man or common person's experience has completely changed over. There's been changes in family structure. There's been a scientific Pandora's box being opened. Literally right before World War I, you got Max Planck coming out with Planck's constant. You got Marie Curie discovering radium and radiation and things like that. And you also have Albert Einstein coming up with his opinions and theories on general relativity. So the thing about it is, when you're really looking at it, the crazy part about it is that science is now being breaking the average man's understanding of the world, where religion and the metaphysical stage of learning, Auguste Comte, remember that guy, the metaphysical stage of learning used to exist in that space. So they don't even really know what position they're being pulled into. How religious am I? How much of this is science and things like that? Gender roles are changing. Women are becoming more active workers in society, right? Well, except from the separate spheres problem. But basically you have massive gender roles changing because women are now more present in society as well. The expansion of suffrage, more people are being allowed to vote, and also the growth of economics is just really messing with the ideas of what life is supposed to be like for the average European, right? Now, the other big thing about it, though, is that's the personal level, the level of the soldier, the confusing and really entangled times during the 1900s that is causing kind of this emotional state of readiness for war, right? Well, the other thing about it, though, is that the countries are entering into a period of readiness for war. Now, here's the thing, okay? I'm going to go ahead and make this very clear, all right? You can be ready for war as a regular person and still be misguided, and it's not a big deal because you're not the one declaring war. But when you're a group of countries and you decide to go to war and go into a war that will claim the lives of 10 million people over the stupidest amount of he said, she said that's ever happened in the world, that's dumb, all right? So, because the biggest thing about it is one of the things that's going to lead to these alliance systems crumbling in on themselves and leading to the beginning of this war is just a growing level of distrust, right? So you're looking at competition between nation states, which is going to lead to the formation and creation of these alliances, right? Simple little competitive things like y'all in gym, you know what I mean? Leading to distrust, right? Things like basically rival lunch groups being formed because one girl used to be with that lunch group, but then they made her upset, so she went and joined this lunch group, and then the lunch groups will eventually all go to war with each other. That actually would be a pretty insane war, right? Now, the core distrust, though, where is it all radiating out of? Is there a is there a grain of sand on this beach of distrust that kind of started this whole problem? Well, there is, and a lot of it comes down to France and Germany, right? France and Germany, by this point, being two very large powers in Europe, are going to loathe each other at this point. Now, a lot of that has to do with a lot of different reasons, right? A lot of it has to do with the fact that Otto von Bismarck literally goaded the French into a war during the Franco-Prussian War so they could continue to expand and unify their nation. You could also make the argument as well, going all the way back to the Napoleonic Wars, that Germans didn't like the French at this point because they were occupied by them and Napoleonic soldiers were forcing them to speak French and all this other stuff. The thing about it, though, when you're really looking at it, is Otto von Bismarck was the best guy to have into the job for this particular time, though, okay? The Franco-Prussian War, the constant shuffling of Alsace-Lorraine, imperialism, and the rise of Germany by this point as a superpower is really threatening France's understanding as well of what's going on in the world and the fact that they have an enemy on their border that they don't trust and they believe could one day result in a war. Now, if France and Germany had just gone to war with each other, everyone would have been fine. But the problem is that Germany is satisfied as a power right now. They have a super industrial economy. They're making aspirin. They're making steel. They're making guns with the Krupp family, and literally everything is continuing to expand. So to prevent that war, because Bismarck's like, you know what? We're pretty content, France. You guys, the whipping boys now, y'all are the one accusing Alfred Dreyfus of literally selling plans to us because you're that afraid of this concept, right? So going into it, though, Germany is pretty satisfied as a power. And they're like, you know what we need to do? Let's create a defensive alliance. So Bismarck comes up with this plan let's create a defensive alliance. Let's create an alliance that will create a territory in the East that France would never want to tangle with, right? And somebody that they would never want to tussle with, that they would never want to go after because it would just be that intimidating and they'd be unable to take us all over, right? So what Bismarck does is he creates this thing early on known as the Alliance of the Three Emperors, right? The reason why it's called that is because all three countries that will actually be in this alliance were considered empires. And it's the German Empire, led by Kaiser Wilhelm I, the German Emperor, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, led by Emperor Franz Joseph, and then also the Russian Empire, which at this point was being led by Russia's Alexander III, right? The brother of the guy that got blown up outside of the Russian church. Remember the whole thing? So, well, not outside of the Russian church. Church built on top of where he was blown up. So now going into it, though, that's the alliance that they created. Now, I want you to imagine this in your mind. Close your eyes and see a map of Europe, right? Look at that map of Europe and see Germany right smack there in the middle. And then see huge Russia right over there on right next to them in the east. And then right next to them in the east as well is the Austro-Hungarian Empire. These three massive entities right over here, and then you got France. So France on the other side. So the thing about it, though, is France is unable to ever potentially take on this massive alliance because they would get crushed. And I don't mean a little bit crushed. I mean a lot of it crushed, right? Because right now, France has nobody on their side. It's just France by themselves. And they would have to go up against three of the largest powers in Europe, right? They don't want to do that. Well, the thing about it is this isolated France deliberately, militarily, and geographically, right? Okay, so the two big ones being militarily and geographically. France is isolated over to the western side alone. They're not gonna enter into an alliance with Spain because Spain doesn't have a very large military. Britain's off doing its own thing. You know, it's been trading and industrial revolutionizing and all that other stuff, and they're just over there being like, oh, fish and chips, like and minding their own business. The thing about it though is that something that Bismarck didn't want the French to know about is that the alliance of three emperors was a little unstable. All right, so now it's particularly unstable for one key reason. Russians don't trust Austrians, all right? So now there's a big reason why, all right? So to give you an example of what led to this whole thing, there was this event known as the Russo-Turkish War in 1877 to 1878, a war in which Russia fought the Ottomans because the Ottomans are crumbling, and just like in the Crimean War, they see this as an opportunity to expand their land and their warm water ports. Now, it's not just that. The ports, the warm water, it's all important, okay? But there was this other reason why, all right? So, like, the Russians had adopted this idea in the 1870s called Pan-Slavism, all right? So now this is really important, okay? Pan-Slavism. Literally, the Russians adopted the idea that all Slavic nations deserve to be free, independent, and autonomous. And Russia, being the strongest of all Slavic nations, would usher them in through peace and would guide them through the world through geopolitics and economic sanctioning and economic ideas, right? They didn't want to take them over. They just wanted them to exist on their own. But who had controlled all these Slavic countries for so long? That's right, the Ottomans. Now, to give you a little heads up, Slavic territories are right down here in the Balkans, right? Slavic nations in the modern era include Slovakia, maybe not Slovenia, Slovakia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Romania, Albania, Serbia. Go ahead and get really, really comfortable with that name and that word. Serbia. All right, so now look, but the big thing about it is all those little countries down here in the Balkans, North Macedonia, Kosovo, Montenegro, all those guys are Slavic. They use the Cyrillic alphabet primarily. They also speak the Slavic languages, and they have Slavic culture, okay? And so Russia was like, we are here to save you, as you can see in this political cartoon map from the late 1800s. So literally, Russia's Alexander III right there is apparently known as the Avenger in this allegorical map, and he's showing up with his cape. He is shirtless. He is the hero. He bears a sword and a shield, and he's destroying the piddly Ottoman Empire right there, who is unprepared for this fight, stabbing him, as you can see, with the blood and right there, and then literally trying to vanquish this villain while the rest of Europe looks on. And also, look at what France looks like. They're just punching each other, apparently. Now, look, the big thing about it, though, also, why is Italy the devil? That's a little creepy, isn't it? So now, look, the big thing about it, though, when we're looking at it, is basically what's going on is Alexander III and the Russians literally view themselves as the people that is there to save the Slavic people. Well, the thing about it is because of the instability of this alliance, after the Ottomans actually lost some territory, the Austrians actually went in and gobbled a bunch of it up. And following the treaty that ended the Russo-Turkish War, which is not the Treaty of Prague, and I can't remember which treaty it is. It's in a city in Europe. Now, the big thing about it, though, is that Russia actually left the alliance for a hot second because Austria was refusing to give up Slavic territory and trying to get more of it, right? Because Austrians are all about growing that empire, prestige, tradition, Clemens von Metternich kind of stuff, right? Now, the big thing about it, though, is Russia was like, I don't want to be with you anymore. I don't like this anymore. You should let those Slavic people go, Austria. And so here comes the big thing about it, is that Austria-Hungary doesn't really trust Russia, doesn't distrust Russia, sorry about that, doesn't trust Russia because of this support for Slavs like Serbs and Bulgarians and stuff like that. So the Russians felt cheated. The Austro-Hungarians don't trust Russia right now, so Russia leaves for a hot second, right? Well, the thing about it is Bismarck, really quickly, fixed it. All right, so like after this whole thing, just so you know, Bismarck fixed it. Bismarck was like, look, Russia, we understand. We will talk to Austria. We will discuss with them about maybe giving up some of these lands and territories that belong to Slavic states. We'll figure it out. Russia comes back for a little while and stuff like that. They actually do this thing called the Treaty of Reassurance, and Russia re-enters into the alliance, albeit still very unstable. But then this dink comes into power. Kaiser Wilhelm II shows up, comes into power, and he forces Bismarck to resign, right? Forces Bismarck to resign, as we already know. He's an idiot, and he forces Bismarck to resign because he's like, you're puppeting my dad and stuff like that, and I'm a big brat, and I have a dead arm, blah. And so what ends up going down is when he forces Bismarck to resign, he actually ends up canceling the alliance with Russia in 1890. But that means right now that one of the people that was a part of this whole thing, that one of the groups that was a part of this big empire alliance, that now is out in the water. And wait, do y'all smell that? It smells like blood in the water. Oh my God, what is that? What is that? What is that over there? Ah! It's this French shark that's this blood in the water that literally is like, wait a minute, if Russia doesn't have anyone to ally with, you know who's going to align with them? France. In France, this French shark, which look how cute he is, he's got a beret and a little flag and stuff like that, and he smelled blood in the water, so he went after Russia, and he created this thing called the Franco-Russian Alliance, right? And literally, now, Germany, now you're literally stamped in. You got Russia over here on your right that hates the Austrians right now, and you got France over here on your left. It's a little sketchy, right? So the big thing about it, though, is France swooped in because they were like that shark in the water, right? And even so, if you ever go to Paris, there's a very famous bridge called the Bridge of Alexander III. I'm going to say it again, the Bridge of Alexander III. That was actually built to actually commemorate and celebrate this alliance that was actually made in 1891, right? It's actually one of the main attractions in Paris and stuff like that. It's a very beautiful, like, gilded bridge and stuff like that. So going into it, though, also, not only did France sense that blood in the water, show up and destroy this entire alliance, and then profit off of it by becoming an ally with Russia, growing distrust between Great Britain and Germany is also being created, right? So a lot of it actually boils down to this arms race that they were having, right? So there was this thing called the Anglo-German arms race. Now, this is one of them. There was also the Fashoda crisis, like several other different big things. The first Moroccan crisis we'll talk about here in a couple of minutes. The big thing about it, though, is that Great Britain is kind of a little nervous about Germany. Now, why are they nervous about Germany? Many historians will tell you that the Anglo-German arms race is actually a manifestation of the true reason why Great Britain didn't trust Germany. A lot of it has to do with the fact that Germany became very industrial and actually was surpassing Great Britain in industrial output, right? Keep that in the back of your mind. But the Anglo-German arms race is also still a really big deal. And a lot of it cooks down to this one boat, all right? So, yeah, it's called the Dreadnought, right? So now look, the HMS Dreadnought, Her Majesty's Service Dreadnought, not to be confused with the HMS Nemesis, right? But the British had developed this boat, this steam-powered battleship and warship that was made completely out of steel, could float thousands of men, and actually had guns and cannons mounted on the decks of it that could fire inland and destroy entire armies, right? And it was literally called the Dreadnought because it's the HMS Dreadnought, right? It's like striking fear into the hearts of their enemies, right? Well, the thing about it is that the Germans got plans for these things, and they were like, ooh, we should make these too. And they enter into an arms race with the British to try and make as many dreadnoughts as they possibly can. They try to make more dreadnoughts than the British can to try and prove their industrial output and stuff like that. Problem is, it just doesn't go the way they want it to, right? Like, it doesn't go the way they want to, and they end up losing this arms race, right? But the thing about it is the Kaiser at the time was approached by some of his admirals, and they go, well, sir, what if we decide to build a different kind of boat? What if we build this boat that nobody believes in, that everybody thinks is a big hunk of junk, and we invest our time in that, and we use it to sink dreadnoughts? And it's known as an Unterseebooten, and literally in German you go Unterseebooten. Say Unterseebooten? That's many of them. So if it's just one, it's Unterseeboot. Now, what that means is undersea boat. I'm talking about, of course, a submarine, right? Like, exactly. A lot of people did not like this idea early on. A lot of people were like, it's a terrible idea. These things break all the time and stuff like that. But it turns out that the prevailing production of underwater boats, of submarines by the Germans, is going to tip the tides of this war in a really, really big way. But wait a second. Is that blood in the water again? Does that mean that right now that there's a country out there that senses the fact that Germany's mad at somebody? Oh my God, who is it again? Ah! Like, so literally the French shark is out there once again and literally enters into this thing called the Entente Cordiale between Britain and France, right? Literally goes into it and he's like, hey, big fella, Britain, I know you don't like Germany right now because they're making more stuff than you, and they're also in this little boat race with you and stuff like that. They're also making these submarines that are going to be a big problem later on. So the thing about it, though, is they enter into this thing called the Entente Cordiale. So now France is allies with Britain, and France is allies with Russia. Now, the only problem that France has is that Russia and Britain are not allies, right? So the Kaiser then goes on and makes it even worse. And he makes it even worse when he actually has this big event called the First Moroccan Crisis, right? So the First Moroccan Crisis was legitimately when the Kaiser showed up in Morocco. This is not going to need a long description. It's a very, very simple little event. He showed up in Morocco, and he actually was talking to the Moroccans, right? Like to the Moroccans and to the people of Morocco. And he was saying, y'all should break away from France. Like, you should break away from France. France doesn't like you. France doesn't have your best interests at heart. This actually made Britain really upset because Kaiser Wilhelm's now violating the terms of the Berlin Conference, is now messing with with an imperial colony of one of their allies. And so not only does this anger France, but it also angers Britain. But yet again, there's that blood all over again. Oh my God, he's everywhere. The French use this example, call up Russia, and they're like, hey, Russia, do you see what this turd is doing to everybody? Not only are they messing with us, but they're messing with my guy, Great Britain. So you guys should enter into an alliance as well. And France encourages Russia to sign the Anglo-Russian Alliance following the First Moroccan Crisis and the agitation of the Kaiser Wilhelm trying to be like, hey, Morocco, you should break away. So the thing about it is this effectively created a new alliance called the Triple Entente, right? Now, there's another alliance in our midst as well, right? And what that alliance is called is the Central Powers, right? The Central Powers is Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the one other country that they could find, Italy, right? So Central Powers are Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And then you've got Triple Entente is Britain, France, and Russia, right? Now, you'd think, the funny thing about this whole thing is that you'd think that family would never go to war, right? Because literally, all these dudes are related. Like, they're all grandkids, grandsons, grandnephews of Queen Victoria. This is George V, the King of England at the time. This is Kaiser Wilhelm. They're friggin' first cousins. And then they're second cousins with this guy, grandnephew Nicholas Romanov, the soon future leader of Russia, right? So now, like, going into it, though, yeah, they're all, like, related. It's super weird. And another big thing about it, though, as well, is the last thing that we'll actually stop off with, is that the extreme militarism of the era is growing, right? Militarism is growing at a short burst of war, and what militarism is its extreme pride in your military and devoting industrial output to your military, right? Like, instead of making cars all the time, we're going to start making some guns. You know what I'm talking about? And the mobilization plans are going to be created by a lot of these military heads of state, like a guy named Alfred von Schlieffen, who you just need to know his name right now, but he's a German military commander who came up with an idea of, if we go to war with these guys, we've got to knock out France first, right? We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Militarism, though, is also going to be promoted as a distraction to political conflicts and parliaments, right? It's promoted as a way to secure jobs. Ironically enough, during this time period, people used to show up outside of parliament and protest, we want 8 and we won't wait. And because it was workers demanding the building of more dreadnoughts, right? They were like, we want 8 more dreadnoughts and we refuse to wait on those. Why do they want 8 more dreadnoughts? Because if the government is paying for them, it's secure jobs, secure funding, and secure pay for the workers of that country, right? But now what we're going to do is we're going to get into the powder keg and the growth of tension in World War I. We got a great story to talk about tomorrow, and I'm really excited about it. But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.